Thank you, Graham, for that kind introduction. And I'm a bit disappointed because Ron had half an hour to talk about all the things he didn't know about PEEP. I've only got half an hour to talk about all the things I don't know about ventilator-induced lung injury, and I don't have long enough. So I'm sorry about that. I'm going to try and talk about some things. And just to start, just to clarify some things, we use a lot of modes of ventilation, and these are often interchanged with each other, and it gets really quite confusing. And I want to sort of simplify that by saying that, in fact, at the end, the problem's in the alveoli. We use this equation of motion. Pressure C is equal to 3 parts, flow times resistance, plus the volume of the time, this equation of motion. But the pressure but actually, as was explained in the previous lecture, the pressure we should really be worried about is the transalveolar, which is the alveolar pressure minus the pleural pressure, which we can't measure easily. So I was asked to talk about ARDS and ventilator-induced lung injury. The ARDS is sinister. It occurs in at least 10% of our patients, and nearly a quarter, and probably more, of patients have mechanical ventilation. And it kills a quarter of the patients, and if you're older, it kills more than half. ARDS is characterized by inflammatory cascades, hypoxemia, induced lung injury, and a number of definitions we use. The further one being the most topical and used at the moment, although I believe that's under review because of some requirements to not be ventilated. So the important thing is that hypoxemia is an important part of this. We spend a lot of the time talking about lung injury that's induced by oxygen, but also by our ability to overcome oxygen. So the yin and yang of about how, with ventilation, we're trying to oxygenate the patient, prevent harm, and there's a conflict and tension between these two goals. So, how to improve oxygenation? Well, the oxygenation is to increase the FiO2, and those are upward arrows. So, getting oxygenation, increasing the FiO2, increasing the mean alveolar pressure, which we can do by increasing the tidal volume, increasing the inspiratory time by changing the pause or the IE ratio, increasing the PEEP. PEEP has this double effect of reopening alveoli as well as raising the mean alveolar pressure and therefore decreasing shunt. We can recruit patients, and we can use things like prone positioning and another number of other tricks to try and improve oxygenation. The oxygen itself may be harmful. This is a study from 40-odd years ago in mice showing the effect of giving 100% compared to air. The one on the left is air, the one on the right is 100% oxygen. See the cilia denuded by the use of 100% oxygen after an hour's exposure. So oxygen's probably bad for us overall, and we know that if you breathe it for about 70 or 75 years, you die. Perhaps higher concentrations make us die quicker. And certainly it does harm. There's a study, this is in the clinical scenario, this is Gerarda's study from 2016, which looked at patients that had ARDS and ventilation using conservative oxygen or conventional oxygen. And there's a clear demarcation in the study between those that got conservative oxygen who did better and those who had conventional oxygen. So the message here was that oxygen may be harmful to you. There are some problems with the study. It was a single-centered trial, and it was stopped early, which, because of an earthquake, they did an unplanned interim analysis. They found this result, and therefore they published, which probably begs a question about what would happen if they waited another 3 months. The other thing that I think is a particular problem is the intention to treat analysis excluded early deaths. If you die within 72 hours, you were excluded from the analysis. Their theory was that you couldn't die from oxygen toxicity in 72 hours, which I don't think there's any evidence for, that's what they believe. The other thing is, although these patients may have done well, there was a concern about the neuropsychiatric outcomes of these patients. This is based on a number of things. We are always concerned that low oxygen may cause subtle but important hypoxemia. This is an analysis of the FACT study by Mickelson and others, which is the fluids and Swan-Ganz catheters trial done quite a long time ago now. But importantly, this is a retrospective analysis of the survivors only, obviously, and looked at the neuropsychiatric outcomes. Those patients that had impaired neuropsychiatric outcomes and were impaired to go home and do their work again, found to have lower PO2s than those who had better survival. So there's a subtle PO2 of 86. Oxygen is not that good for us. Maybe there's some subtle effect. Subsequently, there have been a number of other studies. This is the ICU ROC study, which I was involved with, showed absolutely no difference when we controlled oxygen therapy patients during the time the patients were living. Now, this study has been repeated with the Mega ROC study with a much larger population of patients, but the method is essentially the same. There are some problems with this trial as well, including lots of patients, many of whom we wouldn't expect to come to harm, therefore unlikely to get benefit or harm from high or low oxygen concentration. We're also not controlling for oxygen before or after. This trial will be very large and will probably demonstrate, I'm pretty sure, the same outcome from ICU ROCs, that it doesn't, we can't demonstrate a difference using conservative or usual oxygen. So oxygen, although it's harmful, may be a problem, we can't demonstrate it. So how else can we increase oxidation? Well, we can increase the peak. We can increase the tidal volume or the driving pressure. So we can do this by increasing the tidal volume of driving pressure. We improve oxygenation. This was used for many years to improve oxygenation. Every anaesthetist knows when we send our patients from ICU, they come back from theatre better oxygenated, using tidal volumes of 12 mils per kilogram. They're well oxygenated. The increasing tidal volume increases minute ventilation, decreases the arterial CO2, decreases the alveolar CO2, and therefore increases the alveolo. So on its own, raising the tidal volume will improve oxygenation. It does this also by stretching the alveoli. Increasing the mean airway pressure can also be achieved by increasing the expiratory time, pause time, and this allows redistribution of gas, those slow filling alveoli. We'll talk a little about each of those. We can also raise raising the tidal volume, of course, is a risk. What is the appropriate tidal volume? Well, many years ago, back in 1954, Radcliffe and others published this nomogram. It was a paper nomogram which he put in your gender, height, and other characteristics. They worked out that you should give a tidal volume between 6 and 8 mils per kilogram for normal proper ventilation. Here's the nomogram here. If you put 120 pounds, 5 kilograms, you end up with a tidal volume of about 6.4 mils per kilogram. Back in a few years later, in the 1960s, 1963, Ben Dixon and Hedley White published this paper. They were concerned that atelectasis formed in low tidal volumes, such as described by Radford, were used. They suggested to account for this, you should use a tidal volume of 10 to 15 mils per kilogram. This is where the problem started. They didn't mention the use of PEEP. And of course, in 1967, ARDS was first described, 5 years after Hedley White neighbour had described the use of high tidal volume. And this new phenomenon of hypoxia and non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema, critically ill patients, was described. We learned very soon after that, well, this study by Webb and Turney, that the high pressures and the lack of PEEP increased the risk of lung injury. And it was sometime later, the Keith Hickling described the use of protective ventilation using potential permissive hypercarbia and hyperventilation, described limited tidal volumes as a way to protect against the effects of ventilation on ARDS. Of course, in 1998, the ARDS study was published, which showed a clear difference when lower tidal volumes rather than higher ones were used. This was quite easy to implement. In our unit, we managed to drop our tidal volumes from about 800 mils to 420 mils over a period of time. But unfortunately, that's not been the experience worldwide, and just by Bellini suggests that only 60% of patients who have ARDS get tidal volumes below the 8 mils. It's a bit hard to understand, although the theoretical data shows that it supports low tidal volumes. Animal studies and in vitro studies also support that. It's cheap to do, theoretically easy. Why we don't do this? It's very hard to know. We'll talk about that in the next talk. So it's recommended that patients who ventilate with low tidal volumes, and we all know this now, 4 to 8 mils per kilogram, receive IP. Now, the previous speaker spoke about PEEP at some length, and said he didn't know, although I'm sure he does know what it does. There's no single PEEP strategy that would prove to be ideal. Trials have tried various PEEP strategies. The consensus is that we should be aiming to limit overdistension of the lung parenchyma by providing a maximum number of open alveoli. The studies suggest, this is Briel's analysis, that in the patients with ARDS, higher PEEPs may be beneficial. Unfortunately, patients without ARDS, there's a trend towards harm, not significant in their analysis, but a trend towards harm with higher PEEP. So using a higher PEEP on everybody could in fact be harmful to those patients that don't require it. Ideal PEEP, of course, is a compromise in opening up the lung and keeping the lower parts of the lung that are collapsing open, and keeping not overstanding the upper part of the lung. So it's pretty hard. It's always a compromise. There's no ideal PEEP that fits every alveoli. So, how else can we improve oxygenation? Not FI2 or raising PEEP. What else can we do? Well, one of the problems with raising the pressures is that increasing tidal volume, increasing pause time, and increasing expiratory time will decrease venous return, which decreases cardiac output. And there's the potential for overdistension, gas trapping, and increasing shear pressure. Now, if you go back to the ARDS study, in the first 4 days, patients were enrolled in the ARDS study. Those with the larger tidal volumes of 12 mils per kilogram had better oxygenation characteristics than those that had 6 mils. Increasing arterial oxygen increases intra-alveolar pressure, but increased mortality. So increasing PEEP titrated to arterial oxygen increases intra-arterial pressure. What do we expect that to do to the mortality? Increased tidal volumes increase mortality, but increased PEEP increase oxygenation efficiency. We know the mortality is higher in the ARDS group with large tidal volume, with higher PEEP have the same effect. The idea that we could titrate PEEP using a set pulse oximeter is probably fallacious. We've tried to use esophageal balloons to titrate PEEP, and this latest study by Briel and others using esophageal balloons showed no difference in outcome. So, sorry. What about increasing the respiratory time and pause? Sorry. Uh, we're not increasing the inspiratory time and the pause time. The idea is whether we should suppress or support. Prolonged inspiratory times are natural and patients don't like it. So should we, some of the evidence is that we should be suppressing spontaneous breathing. Others are saying we should allow continuation of spontaneous breathing. The German group saying that allowing patients to breathe spontaneously is a useful tool for manipulation. And the French group saying that paralysis is probably beneficial. This is a paper by Yoshida looking at rat models, and you can see that in the two different models, a mild lung injury and a severe lung injury, the effects are different. Without spontaneous breathing and mild lung injury, the areas of oxygenation are spontaneous breathing. In patients with severe lung injury, however, spontaneous efforts made the injury pattern worse, the red area being bad, the blue area being good. The oxygenation aeration was worse. In the studies, however, the early studies, the Accurate study, revealed that a 90-day mortality was improved with less ventilator-free days and less mortality. Patients that received neuromuscular blocking agents. In comparison, the Rose study showed no significant improvement in endpoint. Meta-analysis showed that neuromuscular block patients were physically less active. That's not surprising at all, is it really? They didn't move as much. They had increased cardiovascular events, reduced risk of barotrauma, improved oxygenation, but without any worsening of ICU-acquired weakness. So although the muscle relaxation didn't do any good, Rose study, and in the meta-analysis, it appears they didn't seem to do any harm either. One thing to remember with neuromuscular blockade is that when you paralyze a patient, we only have two modes left then. It's either a volume targeted mode or pressure targeted mode. If neuromuscular blocking agents increase respiratory compliance, and generally they do, the addition of neuromuscular blockade in a volume mode may decrease alveolar pressure, which may be beneficial. And the studies have all been done in volume modes. If there's addition of neuromuscular blockade in pressure mode, they decrease airway pressures for the same volume. And if you use the same pressure, you'll end up with a larger tidal volume, which may increase the alveolar distension, which may be doing the reverse to what we think it's doing. Rather than helping the patient, it may be harming them. And so neuromuscular blockade with pressure ventilation has the potential for increased ventilated increased lung injury through volume. What about recruitment? Well, recruitment is also a way to improve oxygenation. We're going to talk about this tomorrow in a debate with Jeff, so I won't talk too much about it. There are lots of ways to do recruitment, sustained inflation, including people, pressure control ventilation at high pressures. We don't really know how long to do it for. This is a study by Arnell showing that most of the recruitment that occurs in the first 10 seconds, but may continue for up to 30 or 40 seconds. We really don't know how long. And there is the recruitment paradox. The idea is that increased pressure will give increased volume. The assumption is this increased volume we express by reopening alveoli, allowing those alveoli to be involved in ventilation and therefore decrease the shunt fraction. However, the paradox is that in fact the increased volume that occurs does not occur always, perhaps hardly ever, in the collapsed alveoli. Those alveoli remain closed. They simply raise two fingers up to the pressure and remain closed. What happens is the additional pressure over-distends the already distended alveoli. And although this improves the oxygenation, it doesn't reopen the lung, doesn't protect the lung, it's further lung injury. So increasing the expiratory lung volume may not be because of recruited non-aerated lung, but because of distension of previously open lung units. And the lung volume may not be sufficient to assess the deep response, may not be a useful tool. There are a number of tools we can use to recruit. We're going to do this. This is the ramp method that's available on a number of ventilators. This is Bella Vista, but it shows over a period of time, slow, relatively slow, 2 to 3 centimeters of water will rise per second, raise the pressure, hold when the lung is being recruited, then a slow expiration. Develops a PV tool, and you can see here the volume that's increased. Some machines, and the Bella Vista does this, it actually tells you what volume you've recruited. One assumes, of course, this is recruitment, not leakage, which is often the case. You're using high pressures unless the balloon is inflated, pressure will be Now, recruitment was exciting. We all believed it was going to do what we wanted, to reopen the lung, it had been collapsed, and would therefore help our patients. This because it demonstrated that, at least in this study, of about 1,000 patients, that the use of PEEP and titrated PEEP and recruitment maneuvers actually increased mortality. That was sad because sad for the patients, sad for the study, but also put a kibosh on other thoughts about recruitment, including the VILI study, which was stopped basically on the basis of the finding here that harm was to be done. The last thing I want to talk about is prone positioning. So prone positioning used, and most recently during COVID, is supported greatly. Prone positioning is, there are a number of trials now showing that, meta-analysis showing that it does improve mortality in patients with ARDS. It's not really mediated through improved oxygenation, but rather probably through a better redistribution of gas and distension forces across the lung, leading to a reduction of ventilator lung injury. However, it's not used as much as it should be. John Marini, I think, believed, he said, how many nurses does it take to turn a patient prone? He says it's 8, 4 to turn the patient, 4 to moan about it. Because, in fact, it is logistically hard. It's fear of complications and patients at risk. Now, one of the things I only realised the other day about this is we've always thought about what happens when we turn patients prone is the top bit and the bottom bit are different. The bottom bit's collapsed, the top bit's open. It's obvious. We turn them over, and guess what happens? Well, we hope that as it's turned over, the bottom bit now, that was collapsed. If you drained, it will open up because there's no pressure on it. And I always thought that was the good thing. Oxygenation, better compliance, that lungs now function. But in fact, the protection may be the fact that the lower part of the lung, which has been over-distended by our high pressures, is now relieved of that tension. And the harm may be reduced in that part of the healthy lung, previously being exposed to high distending pressures, being over. We can see that when patients are prone, this really does happen. You can see the distribution does change over time. This is a patient that has been prone, turned back over for a CT scan, see what happens to the top part of the lung. It's just like it was before. This is immediately after being turned into supine. So, how do we improve oxygenation? Those are all the methods by which we do it. As you can see, they're all harms associated with the benefit. So each of those will improve oxygenation. Each of those methods can cause harm to the patient. You really need to do good studies to find. Remember, all those things that raise the mean alveolar pressure, such as increasing tidal volume, pause, and swift, decreased venous return, decreased cardiac output. That may mean oxygen delivered to the vital tissues that we're trying to encourage may be made good. And there's the potential for over-distension of gas. Finally, just to talk briefly about the shear stress. Everyone is aware of the Zamato study showing that as your driving pressure rises above 15, your mortality increases. Animal studies supporting this, that as you gave more power and ventilation, there was more harm done. That the lung weight in this mouse study, lung weight increased as you increase the power of ventilation. Calculation that we do is here. It's very similar to the equation of motion. In fact, it's the same formula that we add in the respiratory rate. It's exactly the same formula as we used to define pressure. Of course, pressure times time equals power. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the problems with this, the power and the minute ventilation. Minute ventilation is the tidal volume times the respiratory rate. Increasing the respiratory rate, you have to increase the flow for the same tidal volume. You're going to keep the same IE rate. Increasing the tidal volume increases the flow and the alveolar distension. These will both have differing effects on power, even though there can be different ways of maintaining the same minute. So that's kind of obvious to me, and I think to most people. The respiratory rate is a double whammy because you increase the flow rate and you increase the pressures caused by flow. This equation has really got nothing to do with the power that's seen by the alveoli. We know this because most of the resistance lung is in the outer airways. We don't get ARDS of the tracheal or the bronchus, it's in the alveoli. So I don't think that force or power being delivered lost in the upper airway has anything to do with power. So what else could we look at besides driving pressure? Well, we could look at the mean airway pressure. And this is a study by a Peruvian group that looked at these patients, and you can see this is plateau pressures, this is driving pressures, mean airway pressure. You see mean airway pressure and plateau pressure very similar to each other. Style. In fact, we could use the mean airway pressure. They showed that there was a U-shaped curve. Patients, as their mean airway pressure rose, the mortality was associated with increased mortality. Mean airway pressure is a good way to measure this because, unlike plateau pressure or driving pressure, it's easy to measure. It's just a number on the machine. There's the association between mean airway pressure and mortality well established in some patients. Morbidly obese is altered, and therefore perhaps are some things we need to think about. Mean airway pressure rising. So what does this all mean? Well, we have to be careful. Association with mortality between driving pressure, mean airway pressure, and other parameters of mortality needs to be thought of this way. Ferraris are red, Ferraris go fast. Therefore, if you look at the motorway, the average speed of cars, they go faster if they're red. You know that, statistically true. But it doesn't mean that if I paint my car red, it'll go faster. However, in medicine, we ignore that. We say things like, healthy people have normal driving. Healthy people survive. Therefore, if a person has a normal driving pressure, they will survive. Therefore, if I lower driving pressure, make them survive. Not necessarily association. So, power and volume of stress are a problem. Perhaps we should be talked about, perhaps more specific hypocapnia to avoid ventilation. So, in summary, low tidal volume, low pressure, open lung makes sense, but we can't prove it. Both seem to be beneficial. We can't show in large studies. You need to minimise, if I do, it would be logical to do that no matter what. And early prone ventilation, patients meeting criteria seems to be. Driving pressure is important, association with mortality, but does it cause increased mortality? I don't necessarily think it does. Patients who are receiving a tidal volume, high driving pressures, have a poor compliance. Poor compliance is associated with mortality. Thank you very much. take questions for a minute or two. No one, everyone's confused enough not to. Good. I'm going to move on. The next talk. Yes, yes. Well, So the next talk is something that I'm very passionate about, as Graham mentioned. We'll talk about beyond basic mechanical ventilation. Really, it's about the basic collaboration and education ICU. And I want to talk about this because it's something that over the last 20 years of my life, I've spent a fair bit of time doing successfully, but and I would, it's okay. Sorry, it's just general comments, yeah. So they don't all fall asleep. This is a slide of New Zealand. That's Mount Cook in the background. It's not always, this is near where Graham lives. It's not always that cold, although it's usually cooler than here. We right? Where'd you go? You can just go. If you put on full page view of those, good. And the folder. There's a reader on my computer. Reader on my
This is why we fucking need shit. I
should have just
airdropped it.
yeah.
Allow.
I'm so sorry, it's my fault.
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Because I gave it to you at least 10 minutes before.
Okay. This is Toshiba. Which one is it?
It should be under SMV.
It's on SMV.
Yeah.
And it's basic
Yeah.
or final or RefCon. Oh, I can look at the last one today.
It says basic.
Okay. So I will take that and I'll just put it up on my desktop. And then I will take this out and eject it. Let's pray it didn't fuck everything up.
Okay. So as I was saying, this is an area of great interest of mine, and just my declarations of interest. The ones at the top are not that important. I'm a consultant in Hawke's Bay Hospital. I've enrolled in the University of Otago, but I'm chair of the Basic Collaboration, which is a group of people I'll talk about in a minute. I just want to talk about education generally, or about ICU in general. An ICU bed, and this came up a lot in COVID. What was an ICU bed? Our Minister of Health kept telling us that we had 200, 500, 350, whatever number he could think of his head, ICU beds. We had to explain to him that an ICU bed is a physical bed, which is a well-appointed environment with electrical supply, gas exchange, and lighting and temperature, all those sort of things controlled. And you had to have equipment that went with that, which was a ventilator, syringe pumps, monitors, and dialysis machines set to appropriate standard. But the thing he didn't understand, and many people don't understand, that it's the staffing that's important. These are nurses and doctors and other allied health professionals who are both trained and experienced in ICU. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Talked about this already. The ARDS study showed that quite clearly that 6 mils per kilogram was much better than 12. But VILI showed in this analysis of 50 countries, only 60% of patients with severe ARDS or mild ARDS or moderate ARDS received tidal volumes that were protective to them. And that's a problem, because it doesn't cost us anything to actually ventilate patients at lower tidal volumes. There's no expense, no additional equipment required. You simply have to turn the knob. We now have better ventilators, and seeing there's a ventilation conference, it's nice to know that some of the newer ventilators actually even tell us the tidal volume per mils per kilogram. So there's no excuse. It's not like, oh, we couldn't calculate it out. It's simply a matter of knowing to do this. So none of the proposals for protective ventilation require expensive pharmaceutical intervention or other capital expenditure. Simply knowing what to do and doing it consistently will be enough. So what we're missing really is not more equipment, monitoring, it's more education, having people who know what they're doing. So the primitive intensive care specialist, when we started, was opinionated, self-reliant. They were good with tools. They were good with their hands. They liked doing procedures, putting chest strains in, if you worked with Rob's old unit. They were often poorly trained. They were self-assessed. They knew what they were doing, and the egos were big. They often had idiosyncratic mechanisms of dealing with it, which they'd learned somewhat by experience, was not necessarily a great teacher. And this has been the case for many years. The number of specialised intensive care specialists available to look after critically unwell patients varies hugely throughout the world. Now, this is data from Asia, which we collected some 10 years ago now. But you can see the small columns means there's lots of doctors per population. This is the number of patients that each intensive care specialist has to treat. See, in Sri Lanka, it's worse now, but it was back in 2017, there was about 450,000 patients per intensivist. Australia and New Zealand, much better staff. Thailand, Fiji, Hong Kong, somewhere in between. So it varies greatly. There aren't the trained consultant staff to look after these patients. But does this make a difference? Well, in Asia, and sorry, that's probably not that clear, the management of severe sepsis in patients in ICU, and they looked at what was the differences between the units and their outcomes. And the thing that made the biggest difference, the thing that was statistically significant, was that if they had an ICU fellowship program, a training program in ICU, if there was a fellowship program, there was a statistically different hospital mortality. Patients going through the ICU did better, survived better, if there was a training program. So the training program made a difference. Well, what about another? Can you change things? This is Rashan Hanifa's study which he looked at 3 hospitals in West Asia, in India and Nepal, and he showed that by a short intervention he could change the mortality is on the y-axis, and the top line on each of those graphs is the prior to intervention. The lower line is after intervention. Tan and Chittagong showed that by doing a short course of intervention education, it could lower the mortality drastically. Now, these are naive ICUs that we run with very limited resources and largely no education. So the education made a huge impact. Not sure, I'd like to think it would make as much difference in my ICU or your ICU. It just shows that ICU education makes a difference. I'm going to talk about the rest of this talk is really going to be about the basic course. The basic assessment and support in intensive care is a course that was generated by a group of interested parties back in 2004. The philosophy had was something along these lines, that education is not learning of facts, but training people to think the way we think in ICU. So, basic collaboration is an informal group of intensive care medicine specialists with an interest in developing and disseminating teaching material. The material is mainly promulgated in short courses focusing on different topics, of which major ones involve mechanical ventilation and upper airway support. And we also teach students as well as doctors and nurses. All material that we give is provided free of charge in an electronic format to appropriately trained and credentialed people. Started in 2004, which interestingly started after the SARS pandemic, the previous coronavirus problem we had. We realized that early on in that pandemic, there were a lot of harm done in Singapore and in Hong Kong particularly, where ICUs were expanded rapidly to cope with the increased ventilator demand. We set up this course so this would never happen again. Clearly we failed, because in 2020, the same thing happened. We hadn't done enough. It was aimed as an introduction course to ICU, and the original course was run in Hong Kong, the next one in New Zealand, some in Australia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. We're running about 2,000 courses a year in 2019, plus other basic collaboration courses and runs in over 50 countries. Aimed as an introduction to help clinicians understand the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to recognise and manage critically ill patients. And during lockdown, after COVID started, we reverted to mainly using e-lectures. We used some social distancing. We'll talk a little bit about what our experience was. It's an opportunity to deliver better education. It's meant to be context-specific, cost-effective, deliverable locally, it's resource appropriate, it's locally sustainable, and largely it's internationally accepted. Basic, a standard course, is a 2 to 3 day course. It's an introduction to intensive care, and really we aim at what does a trainee or clinician need to know in the first couple of weeks in ICU. We promulgate a way of managing patients, not the only way. We think it's important to encourage people to realise there are other ways to do it. This is our way. And in teaching this, we have to keep things simple. The content is sometimes an approximation of the truth. Sometimes teaching people less teaches them more. Accusing them about the complex things of ARDS and recruitment, first day in their job, just loses everybody. Try and use simple principles. One of the principles is on physiology rather than through algorithms or using a set of rules. We try and use formula science to develop teaching. There are a number of courses. The basic course, which is, as I said, a standard course, is used for introduction to ICU. We have a number of courses. Relevant to this is the very basic course, which is a medical student level course, and beyond basic mechanical ventilation, which is specifically aimed at a wider range of ventilation topics. It does go into more detail about the nuances of the different modes and the different problems that we're talking about here today. These are all available. This will be unreadable, I'm sure, from the back, just showing the range of courses we have. We also now have a bunch of called basic LR, used to be called PHS, low resource basic courses, which are available for patients in hospitals that have less resource than you and I would normally expect in our first world nation. The course spread rapidly, slowly at first, but then spread rapidly in the last, during the 2010s. And these are the, see where the courses run throughout the world. Throughout Australia, every capital city in Australia has at least one, usually 3 courses running, sites running. Southeast Asia, West Asia, the Middle East, increasingly in Europe and in Africa. English, it's spoken in English. We do have a couple of translations, but it's mainly done in English. It hasn't taken off the United States for reasons that I can explain without, of course, I'll get into some trouble when I say things. There are lots of reasons why it hasn't taken off. We've done now just under 3,000 courses, 2,290 by 2021, just under 3,000 courses now. Taught 75,000 people, 58,000 in 2021, and 85,000, over 100,000 people now in total on all our courses. But the basic course, the large course, which is done basically every day somewhere in the world at the moment. The course relies on interaction and in small group teaching. Lectures, that is largely done with small group teaching at the bedside with ventilators, who really rely on good, skilled instructors to do this. It's the skill stations that make the difference, not the lectures. Skill stations, the aim of the course is to teach participants to look after patients. Knowledge transfer is necessary. It can be done by the book, the reading of the book, and listening to the lectures. But it's not sufficient. You want them to actually engage in practice. They must be able to apply the knowledge. To do that, you need to test candidates in real scenarios. So the skill stations is an opportunity for participants to apply the knowledge they've learned, an opportunity for instructors to assess that understanding and to adjust their learning. To do this, the participants need to talk. When we're teaching, we like them to be the instructor to speak for less than quarter of a time. Now, I must say that's the hardest thing to do. I end up giving a little mini lecture. I'm a failure. I really am. But the idea is that they're meant to talk. You have to allow them to make. You want everyone to involve, not just one person, to show off, to dominate. You've got to involve those people who are less open about their knowledge and less willing to come forward, less confident. Try and get the group to assist them. You need to check understanding. There was a great classic when we were doing one of the LR courses where a patient came in with burns. The scenario was a patient with burns, pediatric patient with 25% burns, and we asked them, what would you do? And they said they put oxygen on. We thought, that's great. They put oxygen on. The question was, why do you put oxygen on? We said, we'll just challenge whether they know what they're doing. We couldn't remember whether, was it for carbon monoxide poisoning? Was it because their lung damage? Is it because they've got hemoglobin that's been broken down? They said, no. Oxygen is because they can't breathe. Why can't they breathe? Because their skin's burned and they can't breathe through the skin. So that was an LR care. So you just have to be careful that sometimes people will give you the right answer and don't understand it. So checking that understanding is really important. You create a safe environment where people can make mistakes. Encourage answers if they're unsure. People making mistakes will learn a lot. That's why I'm so well experienced. I've made lots of mistakes in my life. If you get it right the first time, you often don't know why you've got it right. And we use simulations. We allow them to continue until they finish. Allow people to make mistakes and then analyse what they could do. Skill stations are meant to be interactive. They're not always. The idea is that you want the candidates to talk. We now have an app And technology is fantastic because just at the time, before COVID started, we managed to develop an app, which you can see the home screen for it here, and that allows us to give all the e-lectures. It's helped us a lot during COVID because we could deliver all the e-lectures as tape lectures, therefore deliver our course largely online. We can do a medical online course completely, which drove us nuts during COVID, but with the numerous courses, the important thing was to get the candidates to pre-read the material, do the pre-course test, be engaged with the material before we spoke to them. It was run in multiple countries worldwide. Problems of time zones and logistics and language. Nothing worse than trying to get up at 2 in the morning in New Zealand to lecture someone in the United States, in the Caribbean, or to do something in Europe, find that they've decided not to come. But time zones were a problem. Language is an issue because language, I speak English and nothing else. It was important that the people involved were doing the pre-reading. People turning up and expecting to teach them online cost. No license fees for running basic. Don't charge anything for the material at all. Course material is supplied in an electronic format, which allows course organisers to print a hard copy of the text. We don't encourage the distribution of the PDF because of historical problems with what version you've got. The course manuals are printed locally or can be supplied from Hong Kong. That was actually, they cost about $3 for us to print, US dollars. But unfortunately, the cost of transporting them now is 8 to 10 times that sometimes. In New Zealand, the cost used to be about $10 in your hand, now $40. Registration fees for the course, we allow people to charge a registration fee on the costs and venues and the degree of subsidy they get from sponsors. And obviously, we need people. Now, during COVID, we managed to train a lot of people in New Zealand and overseas. In New Zealand, we did face-to-face courses. We managed to get, during lockdown, use of a school hall. And we could allow social distancing so we kept people apart from each other and to keep training. Increased accessibility through the app. It was really useful. Thinking about what it was like in 2004 with SARS, 2003 with SARS, 2021, completely different environment with internet learning. Change was great. We developed a course online. You could do virtually online. Here's our website, but which allows us to see whether people page on the website are blanked out. Candidates, you can see whether they've viewed lectures or not. So before we went to the course, you could find out whether people had actually reviewed the material. They didn't. You could say, go away and do it until you've done it. We're encouraged by the Minister of Health in New Zealand to actually roll out COVID, provide us with some extra resource in case we had the widespread use of ICU resources during the COVID outbreak. Never actually happened in New Zealand, but we did a lot of teaching. During the early stages, and it's a bit hard to see this, I received an email from a colleague in another city. Basically said, what the hell are you doing? We've got COVID. This will cause the spread of COVID by having a course and run face-to-face. So please don't do it. It's quite rude. You probably can't see the words there. I've blanked out some of it because to anonymise it, some of it because it was seen. But basically people were frightened of the virus and we were trying to teach people how to deal with it. They still wouldn't want. 6 months for the start of the pandemic, we ran 15 courses for nurses, and 250 participants in 3 sites in Hawke's Bay, Taranaki and Otago. We ran other courses elsewhere. We also ran the online version, and one of our nurses got involved in an online version. This is a course being run in Samoa for the nurses there who had no access to education. The online version allows you, we've gone to a more detailed way of providing questions and answers. So there's a reactive, you ask you a question, say yes or no, because it tells you whether you get it correct or not. If you fail, so it's hard to see. You get it correct, then you move on. If it fails, it takes you back to an education. And the questions are always not lists. They're things like, what would you do first? What's the most important thing to do? What would happen next? Sorry, you can't really see these, but there's a basically we provided the material as an online version. What do we learn? Well, short lectures that are pre-prepared are useful. It does help people's learning. People have different learning styles. Listen to a short lecture. About 10 to 15 minutes is enough. Focus skill stations, either online or face-to-face, are excellent. And now, when you're running an online course, need to allow time for handing over and moving rooms. You need to allow for breaks. Many of us went for several hours without even a toilet stop or drink. And anything larger than 6 tainted the education experience. And that's all I've got to say. Take questions. Basic is available. It does require people to do a training course, which is pretty simple to set up. It hasn't gone in the United States. To talk about that for a second. Not because of anything wrong with the States. You do have FCCS here in the United States, which seems to work pretty well, run by the Society of Medicine, which is a course that fits, I think, with your style of medicine and your ICU. Basic has been written by a group of collaborative people who have tried to develop this course, and we tried very hard to make it generic. It can be applied to just about every ICU I've ever worked in, and we've found that we're just as well in the back of Africa, Asia, Singapore, and in India, where there's less and more resources. Certainly works well in Australia and New Zealand. Your time.